Amanda had everything: a loving boyfriend, a future that seemed certain, and a life full of possibilities, until she met James, her boyfriend's father. What began as a harmless admiration soon spiraled into a dangerous obsession, one that would shatter their lives forever. As their secret grew, so did the consequences, and the explosive truth would tear apart not only Amanda and James, but also the very bond between father and son. Amanda had always considered herself a simple person. She didn't crave attention or drama. Her life had always been about balance: her job at the local cafe, weekend hikes with friends, and evenings spent curled up on the couch with a good book. But everything began to shift the moment she met David. David was different from the other guys she had dated. He was confident, kind, and deeply in love with her from the very first date. Their relationship quickly bloomed into something serious, and for the first time, Amanda felt like she was truly seen. He made her feel special in ways she hadn't known she needed. They had a rhythm, a comfort that made her believe this was it. This was her future. David's family was warm and welcoming. His mother, a sweet, nurturing woman, took Amanda in as one of her own. His younger brother, Josh, was a little too enthusiastic at family gatherings, but he meant well. Then there was David's father, James. James was everything Amanda admired. Tall, with sharp features, and a presence that commanded respect, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that seemed to make him the center of attention wherever he went. He was a successful businessman, well-liked in their small community, and, as Amanda quickly learned, he had a certain charm. He was the kind of man who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. His calm demeanor and knowing smile seemed to make others gravitate toward him. At first, Amanda didn't think much of it. He was just David's father, after all. But she couldn't deny that there was something magnetic about him, something that made her pause whenever he spoke. His compliments felt more lingering than they should have been, and his gaze seemed to hold a depth that made her feel oddly exposed. She dismissed these thoughts, telling herself that she was over-analyzing everything. James was just being friendly, she reasoned. But as the months went by, Amanda found herself looking forward to family dinners and weekend get-togethers, not just to spend time with David, but to be near James. The way he talked to her, the subtle ways he made her feel important, she found herself drawn to him, even though she knew she shouldn't be. Her mind would occasionally wander to thoughts she didn't want to acknowledge. It was just innocent admiration, she told herself. It wasn't anything more than that. But as the weeks passed, Amanda realized she had begun to crave his attention. There was something about the way he made her feel seen in a way no one else did. It wasn't just his looks, though he was undeniably attractive. It was the way he could command a room without saying a word, how he exuded confidence and authority, how he made her feel like she was the only one in the room. Amanda tried to push these feelings aside, convincing herself that her attraction to James was just a passing phase, but deep down, she couldn't shake the unsettling thoughts. She wasn't just infatuated with him. There was a strange pull that she couldn't explain. And despite her best efforts to ignore it, the line between admiration and something darker was beginning to blur. In the beginning, it was easy to brush off her feelings. But as time went on, she began to notice that they were no longer fleeting thoughts. They were becoming a constant in her mind. Each moment spent with James, whether at family barbecues or casual visits, left her wanting more. And that feeling of longing was something she had never experienced before. As the days passed, Amanda's thoughts about James became harder to dismiss. What started as simple admiration quickly morphed into something more complex and troubling. She began to notice the little things. The way his voice dropped an octave when he spoke to her. The way his eyes lingered just a moment too long when he caught her glancing at him. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But she couldn't ignore the growing sense that something was stirring between them. She found herself replaying moments in her mind. Moments where his touch seemed to hover a bit too close, or when his smile felt just a little too intimate. The more time she spent with David's family, the more Amanda felt herself torn between two worlds. With David, everything felt familiar and safe. He was her boyfriend, her partner, and they shared a bond she cherished. But when James was around, something in the air shifted. Amanda was drawn to him in a way she didn't understand, a pull that she had never experienced before. She couldn't shake the feeling that his attention toward her was something more than just friendly kindness. At family gatherings, Amanda tried to maintain her composure, but she couldn't help but steal glances at James when he wasn't looking. There was something about his presence, his confidence, his quiet yet compelling nature, that made her feel both excited and uncomfortable at the same time. She was acutely aware of the way he seemed to study her, as if he could see right through her, as if he knew what she was thinking before she did. It was unnerving and exhilarating all at once. Amanda began to second-guess herself. Was she reading too much into things? Was she imagining the way his gaze would follow her across the room, or the subtle way he would touch her arm when handing her a glass of wine? It wasn't overt. There were no bold advances, no clear signs that he was interested in her in any way that was inappropriate. But the more she tried to ignore it, the more those small moments began to consume her. Her relationship with David, once the center of her life, started to feel distant. She still cared deeply for him, but the more she was around James, the more her thoughts seemed to drift toward him. It was like a quiet storm brewing inside her, an obsession that she didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't control. She found herself thinking about James even when she wasn't with him, fantasizing about what it would be like to be the center of his attention in a way she hadn't felt before. The connection between them, though unspoken, felt real to her. The guilt gnawed at her, but it was overshadowed by the overwhelming desire to be near him. She could feel herself becoming more and more obsessed with the idea of him, even though she knew it was wrong. At times she would catch herself imagining what it would be like if she could tell David the truth, if she could confess the strange, powerful feelings she had for his father. But the thought of doing so terrified her. The consequences would be unimaginable. She didn't want to lose David, yet she couldn't escape the pull she felt whenever she was near James. Amanda began to retreat into her own mind, her thoughts filled with conflicting emotions. She was trapped in a cycle of guilt, desire, and confusion. No matter how hard she tried to push the feelings aside, they only grew stronger. The more she saw James, the more impossible it became to ignore the magnetic attraction she felt. She was becoming consumed by it, unable to break free from the spell he seemed to have cast over her. Her relationship with David, once the foundation of her life, was slowly slipping away. And in its place, a dangerous obsession was taking root. An obsession with James that would soon threaten to unravel everything. It was a chilly evening when everything changed. David had been called into work unexpectedly, leaving Amanda alone with James at the family home. At first it seemed like any other quiet night. They were accustomed to these one-on-one moments when David was busy, and they usually passed without incident. But tonight, something was different. Amanda had arrived earlier than expected, and James had insisted they have dinner together, just the two of them. They sat across from one another at the dining table, the soft glow of candlelight flickering between them. The usual chatter that accompanied family meals was absent, replaced by an eerie silence. The tension between them was palpable, as though the air had thickened with unspoken words and shared glances. Amanda could feel it, her heart racing in her chest as she tried to focus on her meal, but her attention kept drifting to James. He was looking at her, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. His eyes seemed to pierce through her, searching for something that she couldn't understand, something that made her feel both seen and vulnerable at the same time. She lowered her gaze to her plate, trying to distract herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The connection between them was undeniable, charged with an energy that neither of them could deny. James broke the silence first, his voice low and measured. He spoke about his work, about the community. But Amanda barely heard him. All she could focus on was the way his voice seemed to wrap around her, the way his words made her feel as though she was the only one in the room. Her pulse quickened with each sentence, and she felt her skin flush, an overwhelming warmth creeping up her neck. The conversation shifted, and Amanda found herself drawn in further. James began to talk about the past, about memories of his younger years, and for a moment they both seemed to forget the distance between them. He spoke with such passion, such care, that Amanda felt as though he were confiding in her, sharing pieces of himself that he had never shared with anyone else. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable, and it stirred something deep inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge until now. Then, without warning, James reached across the table, his hand brushing lightly against hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her, a shock of sensation that made her heart race. It was so simple, so innocent, but to Amanda it felt like a dare, a challenge. The brief touch lingered in the air long after his hand had pulled away, leaving a trail of tension that neither of them could ignore. For a few seconds the room felt impossibly quiet. Amanda's breath caught in her throat, and she met James's gaze once more. This time, there was something different in his eyes, something that made her chest tighten. She could see it clearly now, the same longing, the same desire that she had been trying to suppress for weeks. It was as if, in that fleeting moment, they both realized what had been growing between them. There was no turning back. Without thinking, without fully understanding what was happening, Amanda stood up, almost as if her body was acting on its own accord. She walked around the table toward him, her every movement fueled by an undeniable pull. James didn't move, but his eyes never left hers. His breath quickened, and for a brief second Amanda thought he might stop her, that he might say something to break the spell. But he didn't. Instead, he reached out, his hand gently cupping her face, pulling her closer. The kiss was tentative at first, as if neither of them quite knew what to expect. But it deepened quickly, becoming something more urgent, something that both of them had wanted, but hadn't allowed themselves to act on until now. The world outside of that moment ceased to exist. It was just them, the two of them, caught in something neither could fully control. When the kiss ended, Amanda stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the way her body trembled with desire, the way the kiss had made her feel alive in a way she had not felt in years. The realization hit her like a freight train. She had wanted this, and now it was too late to undo what had just happened. The days that followed were nothing short of a spiral. Amanda tried to ignore the growing sense of dread that clung to her, but the weight of what had happened between her and James was impossible to shake. Each moment felt like an echo of the kiss, a reminder that something irreversible had taken place. She couldn't undo it, and every time she saw David, she felt the deepening divide between them, though he remained unaware of the storm brewing under the surface. Amanda's relationship with David had always felt like a steady ship, one that she trusted to weather any storm. But now it seemed to be taking on water. She had never felt more distant from him. Her mind was no longer wholly occupied with thoughts of their shared future. Instead, her thoughts were consumed by James. It wasn't just the physical attraction that haunted her. It was the emotional intensity of the connection. The way he had looked at her. The way he made her feel seen in ways David never had. She tried to push these thoughts away, but they lingered, festering and growing stronger each day. Every time she saw James, her pulse would quicken. He was careful, his demeanor unchanged, but Amanda could sense the quiet understanding between them. The kiss had not been a mistake. It had been a mutual recognition of the desire they both had tried to deny. He would catch her eye at family dinners, and for a fleeting moment, the world around them would disappear. The stolen glances, the brief touches, the silent conversations, they were all part of an unspoken agreement. But as Amanda's obsession deepened, so did the guilt. She no longer felt like the person she once was. She started to withdraw from her friends, unable to focus on anything other than the tangled mess she had created. The guilt gnawed at her, but at the same time, the longing for James only grew. She tried to convince herself that it was temporary, that it was a moment of weakness. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It wasn't just about a physical attraction. It was a need that consumed her, that made her crave his presence, even when she wasn't with him. Her days became increasingly filled with anxiety. Every time David asked her about her day, she would lie, pretending everything was fine. But inside, her world was falling apart. The whispers of the affair echoed in her mind, the fear of getting caught rising like a tide she couldn't escape. She became hyper-aware of every small interaction with James, the way he would brush against her arm when passing by, or the way he would talk to her with that same intensity that had first drawn her in. Each encounter was both a source of comfort and torment, knowing that with every passing moment, she was getting deeper into something that would destroy everything. Amanda's facade began to crack. She grew more erratic in her behavior, unable to hold up the pretenses of normalcy. Her anxiety became overwhelming, and she found herself lashing out at David for the smallest things that would never have bothered her before. David, confused and hurt, didn't understand the shift, but he attributed it to the pressures of their lives, the stress of work, and the demands of adulthood. He had no idea that the true cause of Amanda's restlessness was sitting just a room away. The affair had shifted from a hidden, stolen moment to something that controlled Amanda's every action. She began making excuses to visit the family home when David wasn't there, seeking out private moments with James. Her actions became reckless, her obsession with him undeniable. Every time she left the house, she wondered if David would ever notice the subtle changes, the way her eyes would dart around nervously, as if expecting to be caught. She was living a double life, each day more unstable than the last, and the realization that she was losing control was becoming painfully clear. She had crossed a line, and now, with every step she took, she knew there was no turning back. The affair was no longer a secret. It was a shadow that followed her, a presence that weighed heavily on her every decision. She had gone too far, and the inevitable consequence of her actions loomed closer with each passing day. But in the madness of her obsession, Amanda couldn't bring herself to stop. The pull of desire for James was stronger than the guilt that plagued her. She was trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape, caught between two worlds that could never coexist. The truth unraveled in a moment that neither Amanda nor James could have anticipated. It was a Thursday evening when everything came crashing down. David had come home earlier than usual from work, and Amanda, as she always did, had been at the family home, this time under the guise of helping James with some paperwork. They hadn't planned for this encounter, but in that instant, everything that had been carefully hidden was exposed. The moment David walked through the door, the tension in the room was palpable. He immediately noticed something was wrong. The air felt thick, charged, as though it was holding its breath. David didn't say anything at first. He stood in the doorway, observing the scene before him. Amanda was sitting on the couch, her face flushed, her eyes wide with fear. James, standing by the window, looked strangely composed but guilty, his posture stiff as he avoided eye contact with his son. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It was as though time had frozen, and in that moment, David could feel something shift in the air, something that made him uneasy, but he couldn't pinpoint it. It was only when he asked what was going on that everything started to spiral. Amanda felt the words stick in her throat. How could she explain the chaos she had created? The lie she had been living, the betrayal that now weighed heavily on her shoulders. She wanted to say something, anything, that could fix it, but the words wouldn't come. David's eyes searched hers, his confusion turning to suspicion. He stepped forward, his gaze moving from Amanda to his father, then back to her. He could see it now. Their shared history, the glances, the subtle exchanges that had gone unnoticed until now. It was James who finally spoke, his voice low and controlled, though Amanda could hear the strain behind his words. He didn't deny anything. He didn't offer excuses. Instead, he confessed in a way that shattered everything. He admitted to the kiss, to the affair, to the moments they had shared in secret. David stood there, unmoving, his face a mixture of disbelief and pain. Amanda's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at him, knowing she had ruined everything. The silence between father and son was deafening. David's face twisted in anguish, as though he couldn't comprehend what was happening. He had trusted Amanda, loved her, built a future with her, and now, everything had been destroyed. James, too, seemed affected, though he remained distant, as if the weight of his actions had already sunk in. But for Amanda, the guilt was overwhelming. She wanted to reach out to David, to explain, but she knew there was nothing she could say that would make this better. She had betrayed him in the worst way possible. David's reaction was both painful and predictable. He demanded that Amanda leave. The words were cutting, filled with a rawness that tore at her heart. He didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear her try to justify her actions. He couldn't even look at her without feeling the betrayal course through him. The relationship that had once felt like a steady foundation now lay in ruins, and there was nothing Amanda could do to fix it. James, realizing the enormity of the damage he had caused, tried to speak to David, to explain that this wasn't entirely his fault. But David wasn't listening. His anger was palpable, but so was the deep sadness that came with the realization that the man he had looked up to, the man he had trusted his entire life, had betrayed him in the worst way imaginable. Amanda, now completely unraveling, left the house with nothing but her shattered emotions. As she walked away, the weight of what she had done pressed down on her like a vice. She had lost David. She had lost herself. The affair, the obsession that had consumed her for so long, had led her to this moment, where she had lost everything that mattered. Days passed without any contact. David refused to answer her calls, and James avoided her as much as possible, knowing that he too had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Amanda eventually disappeared from town, slipping away to try and escape the ruin of her life. Rumors about her whereabouts began to swirl, some saying she had left the country to start over, others suggesting that she had gone into hiding, unable to face the consequences of her actions. James, though trying to salvage his relationship with his son, found himself alienated. His attempts to repair the damage were futile. The bond between him and David had been shattered beyond repair. In the end, the father and son remained estranged, with no way to heal the wounds that Amanda's obsession had caused. Amanda's life after that day was never the same. She faded into the background, a shadow of the woman she had once been. She had destroyed everything in pursuit of a forbidden desire, an obsession that had consumed her, led her down a path she could never return from. The town moved on, but the stain of the affair would never be erased. And for Amanda, the memory of the betrayal haunted her forever, a reminder of the one reckless decision that had unraveled her entire existence.